Please welcome our host, climate journalist and presenter, Maeve Campbell.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maeve Campbell. I'm a climate journalist based in London, and I'm very excited to be here to be hosting our third and final flagship at the Hub Live. Now, despite what Donald Trump said in the UN just a few minutes ago, it is clear that climate action is no longer on the margins of society. It sits at the heart of strategies for governments, businesses, and communities worldwide. And what's driving that progress is people. People creating legal frameworks that hold the big guys accountable, financial innovators shifting capital toward climate solutions, activists demanding urgency, technologists inventing breakthroughs, and communicators, like many of us, telling the story in creative and hopeful ways. Each of these levers is people-powered. The question before us today is how we keep pulling harder and faster on the levers that matter most. How we turn human ingenuity and influence into transformative policy, commitments, and investment. So this session today is unpacking all of that. Just a small task. We'll be highlighting the progress that we've made, while also being honest with ourselves about how much left there is to do. It's all very well engaging the head and the heart, but the power really is in our hands, as Dr. Katharine Hayhoe would say. So I'll tell you how it's going to work this last session of the day. It's going to be in 3 parts. First, we're going to dive into how we can make the polluters pay through the lens of climate justice in the first panel. Then we'll bring in the world of tech and sustainable mobility. And lastly, I'm going to come back on to moderate, and we're going to do a panel on the power of language, my favorite topic, with none other than Dr. Katharine Hayhoe herself, one of the world's most famous climate scientists, known for making climate change accessible and deeply, deeply human, along with National Geographic explorer Malaika Vaz, and the self-proclaimed conservative environmentalist himself, Benjamin Bakker. So first, I'm going to introduce the first panel, and then I'm going to get off stage and give it to someone else. So the first panel is called Big Emissions, Bigger Bills. How can we hold the world's biggest polluters to account? Moderating the discussion is Adam Weiss from Client Earth, and joining Adam on stage are 3 incredible change makers who I'm sure you will love. I do. Dr. Beverly Knight, who is founder of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, Mads Christensen, who's executive director of Greenpeace International, and lastly, Wawa Gatheru, who is a climate activist and founder of Black Girl Environmentalist. Please give them a warm welcome to the stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to be here at Climate Week New York City and among such an inspirational group of panelists. Our time is short, and we have extraordinary people with incredible things to say, so I'm going to dive right in and ask my first panelist our first question. Dr. Beverly Wright of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, you've spent years living and working in communities hit by heavy polluting industries. From what you've seen, what does day-to-day life really look like in those places? And looking ahead, how do you think policy and climate justice can come together to make sure those responsible are properly held to account?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Beverly Wright. I'm the executive director of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice in New Orleans, Louisiana. I've been told it's the favorite city for most people. It is for me. But I also live in Cancer Alley, which is an 85-mile stretch of land between New Orleans and Baton Rouge that's now home to 156 petrochemical plants and 6 refineries. And the people who live there suffer very much from pollution. Specifically, a day and a life in Cancer Alley is one that's normal in a certain type of way. But the other way it's abnormal is that we have one of the highest cancer rates in the nation. We have a pollution that's indescribable. We have explosions from industrial facilities, but we also have people who don't have voice. When you talk about democracy, democracy means power to the people. Well, Cancer Alley happened because people don't have power, and they don't have the proper connections to authorities, meaning government or people who are supposed to represent them. We have not been represented for hundreds of years, moving from slavery to Jim Crow to discrimination. Those things have continued. Thousands and thousands of acres of land has actually been stolen from Black people in Cancer Alley, but we are still there. The good news is that we have never given up. We started working, my center did 31 years ago, and at that time, the chemical corridor was filled with 800 million pounds of pollution into the air, water, and soil. After working very hard, building the capacity of communities to have voice, it's down to about 200 million pounds, but guess what? That's about the same amount of pollution that's in all of Texas. So you have an 85-mile stretch of land where people are very sick, they have rare cancers, and we don't get the support that we should get from universities who have the opportunity or the ability to conduct research that actually supports making life better. When you have a town that's really owned by the petrochemical industry, they grow their own politicians, we're in a really tough place for change. The good news is we're not giving up, and we are connecting with people locally, nationally, internationally to get our message out, and we're trying to come together with strategies. Even in times that are as tough as these, we have to keep working towards that, and we will. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Our next panelist is Mads Christensen of Greenpeace International. Mads, Greenpeace has been on the front lines for over 50 years, pushing the biggest polluters to clean up their act. From your perspective, what's actually worked best, whether it's legal action, financial pressure, or grassroots campaigns to drive real change in boardrooms and in policy?
A delight to be here, and thank you for inviting me and to pose such an easy question. I think the answer to that can also be very short. It is basically yes. Yes to it all. Because I think we've seen wonderful examples over the last many years of how all three avenues have worked for us. Whether they will work going forward, I think, is a little bit more of a big question. But I think the bottom line is that, and we all know the story too well, the cost of the planetary crisis keeps rising. And right now, it is the wrong people that pay that price for it. So there's absolutely no doubt that it will be the greatest injustice in the history if we don't fix that problem and make sure that it's actually the polluters that start paying for it. So when we talk about corporate accountability today, in a situation where we see failures many places in global collaborations, in multilateralisms, then at least to me, corporate accountability is about make polluters pay. And I think for us in Greenpeace, it's quite clear that our lesson has been over the last many years that in order to prevail and win fights and battles, and we certainly haven't won enough, we need courage. We need to show courage. We need to be able to project that in the right way. We need passion as we do that. And perhaps very importantly, we also need persistence, because these things take time. But what we have found out in the last years, which we perhaps were not good at in the past, was that alliances, working together, delivering together, understanding that it's only in that way we can actually leverage the power that we have. We all know well the beautiful examples that we've seen the past years of some of the successes of people working together. Just to name a few, I think the grassroots movements that we saw with the school strikes, with the with Extinction Rebellion, many other movements that walk the street, make no mistakes. I mean, these movements worked. They created real changes in our laws, especially in Europe, but certainly also many other places that we still see today. This is very important, and I'm super proud to look at my own organization, Greenpeace's role in how we supported Greta Thunberg from the first day, my colleagues in Sweden, right? So we feel that we're part of it, but it's only because of the many that we come through on that. Klimaseniorinnen, that probably we all know very well in this room, the legal victory in the European Human Court case, a group of fierce women who brought the Swiss government to court after they've exhausted all possibilities in Switzerland. They took it to Brussels and to, sorry, no, it's not in Brussels. I don't even know where it is, to be honest.
Strasbourg, yeah.
Strasbourg, that's true. And they won it, and now trying to translate that into real change, not only in Switzerland, but beyond. Fantastic. The divestment movement is the third example, right, where we've seen hundreds of institutions, thanks to a broad movement, trillions and trillions of dollars worth of investment moved out of fossil. So I think all of these things we have to take with us. We know that going forward, it'll be more difficult. The world is changing, and all these things that we know way too well. I think one thing that we have our eyes locked on very, very tightly right now, that's actually the UN Tax Convention. You know, so in many ways we still believe in multilateralism. We still believe that, again, if we have to hold corporates accountable, then finding a fair way of sharing the wealth and make polluters pay has, of course, to happen through some international agreements. And there is momentum right now around the UN Tax Convention. There are some real solutions in that I think can provide answers to some of the questions that we're looking for, right? So all that just to say that while we can be depressed over many things that are happening, then let's make sure that we identify sort of the same fights and try to fight them together.
Thank you so much. And now our third panelist in this powerhouse of activism, Wawa Gathru, an activist. You've been such a strong voice for an intersectional, youth-led approach to climate justice. For young people staring down the reality of a 1.5 degrees Celsius world, how important is it to hold heavy emitters to account? And if financial accountability begins to take off in the way we all hope it will, how do we make sure that money is invested in ways that truly benefit future generations?
Yeah, well, hi everyone. I'm Wawa. I'm so excited to be here alongside you all, and especially Dr. Beverly Wright, who's one of my inspirations. So this is a real full circle moment. That's a heavy question. I mean, here's the thing. Accountability has to be at the heart of all these conversations, especially when it comes to climate finance. And there's an analogy that I like to use, which is any crisis or catastrophe that happens in an unequal society will have unequal impacts. And that is very true when it comes to the climate crisis. We're talking about hurricanes, floods, heat waves. They don't fall on a blank slate, right? They didn't fall out of a coconut tree. They are falling onto existing systems, prevailing systems. They're falling on a legacy of redlining. They're falling on a legacy of redlining that today makes it so that communities of color and previously redlined communities are to 5 to 12 degrees hotter than their whiter, wealthier counterparts that didn't experience that type of discriminatory policies. They're falling on existing health and wealth gaps. So when we talk about accountability, we need to name heavy emitters. We need to name the fact that folks for a long time have put profit over people and planet time and time again, that they've known about their business practices, the way that it's impacting our planet, reinforcing ecological breakdown, and the fact that other people have had to pay for it. And the perpetrators have a debt that they have to owe. And second, when we talk about accountability, we need to talk about accountability with a big A, not a small a. And that means really at the heart, making sure equity is at the heart and making sure that reparative justice is at the heart. And when we talk about reparative justice, particularly in terms of climate finance and moving it where it needs to go, we have to ask the question that I think that climate finance has failed to ask, which is, who have we deemed worthy of investment and who have we deemed unworthy of investment? I think, a critique we could have of conventional climate finance is that it gets really wrapped up in bureaucracy and in mega projects that don't find themselves into the hands of communities that are experiencing the brunt of these issues and that already have all the solutions and just need the finance to scale them. But we really need to understand that if a truly generational investment is going to happen, we cannot make it in the model that we've followed for so long. So what does it look like? Where should that money go? That's a big question. Everybody wants money. But we have to understand that it doesn't begin and end at writing checks, even though checks are great, and we should definitely be writing more checks. We should be funding community, locally owned renewable energy. We should be funding youth-led climate organizations that receive 0.76% of global climate philanthropy. We need to be funding initiatives that are pushing for land back. And we need to really push back from this idea that we have to have a colorblind approach, right? This goes back to the equity and justice at the heart of this. We know that communities are not experiencing the climate crisis the same way. Even though we're all weathering the same storm that is the climate crisis, we aren't all in the same boat, and we actually have to take that to heart in how we're moving climate finance equitably.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, and I really like the idea of accountability with a capital A. I may steal that from you if it's okay. But a real transformative way of working, I think, is what we need, and the three of you have made that clear. I have got a question for the three of you, whoever wants to take it, and we've got a little bit of time. We've heard a lot about net zero as the gold standard for climate action. But what if we started talking about net justice instead? What would a climate strategy rooted in justice look like? And could we build a future where equity and emissions reductions go hand in hand? Do you think it's possible to bring these two ideas closer together?
Well, I certainly believe that it's possible. It has everything to do with whether or not we have the will. And in order to have the will, we have to change the narrative. I think that our biggest problem is that we have not been successful in changing the narrative. And one of the things that may help us will be young people like Wawa. I think it's too late for old people like me. I don't mean to say that, I don't think it's too late for me, but I think it's too late for other old people like me, because I'm ready. But it's going to require just a completely different conversation with young people. I was told that democracy requires an educated populace. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? The environment requires an environmentally literate populace. And we need to be working towards making certain that our children are educated properly. So that they make the change. It can't be change from the outside that we force on people. It has to be something that bubbles up from young people, societies in general, just making decisions. Now, I think that Mother Nature, before it's over with, is going to force us to make changes because it's going to be too expensive and too destructive for us to stay on this same path. I'm hoping that we get there before Mother Nature gets us. But it's looking like that may not happen. So just having to learn to live the way we're living, we'll have to live with hurricane after hurricane, tornadoes, burning tornadoes. I mean, it's just amazing. I think we'll force the world to start thinking differently. And, my prayer is that the United States can rejoin the world and thinking about moving towards an economy that is fair and just and is based on an equitable, renewable transition. Being a grandmother for the first time at 77 years old, I'm so excited, but I'm also worried. And I think most of us would like a better future for our children. It will require a different conversation. It will require international connections in the way that we've been trying to do, and the U.S. has been stepping back from that, which is very painful for those of us who've been doing this work for so long. Finding a way to change that narrative is absolutely what we need to do in order for us to survive. Thank you.
I mean, well said. And I've been struggling a little bit with the net justice concept, right? Does that mean that we accept some justice and then can balance it out by other justice? But anyway, I think we should also focus very much on ensuring that the justice elements that was actually baked in the climate agreements that we have, right, are actually also enforced, right? When we know in the Paris Agreement we agreed to making sure that everyone does something, but that there is different responsibilities for different countries. We have elements that are simply not being adhered to today. Obviously, I think as we talked about before, it's absolutely important that we bring the justice element to the center of the conversation. And again, coming back to the financial aspects here, we have so many inequities and injustices in the financial systems today, right? Whether it's about the perverse subsidies that are happening out there, whether it's about the unfair and insufficient taxation of the super rich, or it's about making the polluters pay. I think these are fundamental injustices that we need to address in the system.
Agreed. Wabra, did you want to comment on this one? In that case, well, no, those are provocative and important answers, and I have a provocative question for you all. Provocative because of where we're sitting. The International Court of Justice just made a landmark statement. Failing to act on climate change could actually break international law. That's huge. So does that mean, so what does this mean for how countries and corporations are held accountable? Could this open new doors for frontline communities to demand justice and reparations that ways that weren't possible before? The reason why I said it's provocative because we're sitting in the United States of America. And I wonder, particularly from an American perspective and from a global perspective, what you all think of this ICJ advisory opinion.
Please don't make me make excuses for the U.S. I'm on the wrong side of this. I think that those of us who live in the U.S. are completely exhausted from the many, many times that laws are just not followed. Our problem is that we now have to figure out how to enforce laws that are on our own books, not just international law. So if we get our country back, then I think it's possible. But as I said, we have to change this narrative so that people who don't vote feel there's a reason to vote, and that we begin to respond to the needs of frontline communities in a way that makes them feel that this is their government and they have a right to be a part of it. I don't have all of the answers for it. I just know that we must continue to fight. With all of the tools that we have available to us, we will. The frontline communities have always had pretty good nonprofit lawyer organizations, and I'll call out a few names because I like these groups: Earth Justice, Lawyers for Good Government. These groups really work hard to find legal remedies around things that are going in the wrong way, or when laws are being broken. We just don't give up. So right now, I'm actually in a position where I am suing the government for different grants that have been taken from us. Yes. And we plan to take it all the way to the top. So maybe we will lose, but as I tell people all the time, being African American in the United States, we would still be picking cotton if somebody hadn't continued to fight. So not fighting does not exist for us. We will fight when we win. We will fight when we lose. We will continue to fight, trying to find new avenues to get to justice, to get to our ability to create a better world for everybody and to improve the quality of life for my grandchild that I'm hoping will have a better world to live in.
Thank you so much. As a lawyer, it makes me very excited when people get excited about suing for justice. It's true, and actually maybe,
justice, yes.
yeah, because of course our adversaries use the courts as well, and it's something that we have to think about. And I heard Matt speak about it eloquently yesterday. Well, I might just put this to you briefly because I'm a nerdy lawyer and I live in Brussels where people care about things like what the International Court of Justice says. But does that advisory opinion speak to young people? Does it speak to your audience? Oh, yes. Good.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's really exciting. It's a crack in the armor for sure. I mean, here's the thing. I don't think this type of court ruling is not going to undo centuries of exploitation and the millions of lives that have been lost, right? But it certainly ushers us towards a narrative shift for sure. And it's saying what, like Dr. Wright was just talking about, it's saying what frontline communities have been saying for so long, that not acting on climate isn't just negligent, it's unlawful. And it also really breaks down this facade that climate disaster, again, just came out of nowhere, that it fell out of the sky, that it's acts of God. Like, no, like, there are fingerprints there. It really breaks down this illusion of innocence. And it goes back to what we were talking about, making polluters pay, et cetera. But I think young people, it's exciting to see the fact that the truths that our communities have been saying for so long is now in the law, and we can point to it. And hopefully that ushers in a new era of real conversations about climate reparations, which is exciting.
Thank you for that. Our time is almost up, so I want to ask each of you one last question to get a brief answer from you. If this panel could spark one global action, what should it be, and who needs to hear it the most?
Oh. You all should have given us this question ahead of time.
Well, I wanted to hear what you were going to say off the top of your heads.
I'll let somebody else go this time while I think. One.
Yeah, one is the difficult one.
I know.
Because there's so many things that needs to be done out there in the world right now, and we need to fight on all fronts. So it would be wrong to sort of just have one fight right now. But I think I would still go back to the UN Tax Convention. Not because that in itself, but because the framework that could create, the umbrella, would open so many new doors for us. And we need to push from the political, from civil society, from progressive business as well. So this is one of the key fights that we have in front of us now.
Well, I think that whatever my action would be, it would be something that was mobilizing young people around the globe, because that's where our future lies. Not with a lot of old people talking back to one another, if you know what I mean. We really need young people involved and engaged in whatever we could do to create a moment where young people all over the globe came together with one voice, saying we want justice, climate change is real, and we are insisting that our governments put in place measures for us to reach the goals we need to reach to save the planet. But I'm a teacher, so of course that's the way that I think.
That's beautiful.
I don't know if I can answer this question with the full gravity of it, but going off of what Dr. Wright was just talking about in terms of young people, I guess because I'm the Gen Z representative on this panel, I'll speak for other young people who are involved in youth-led organizations. Again, we receive 0.76% of global climate giving. And obviously everybody, especially right now with there being so many federal grants that have been essentially taken from communities that have already countersigned grant agreements, we need to be funding young people. It seems as though young people and youth movements are on the lips of everyone, but when it comes to really financing initiatives that we're creating because we understand what we need best, it's crickets. I will give a shout out to Levers for Change and some other organizations that might be in this room that recently just did a huge announcement where they're going to be redistributing $25 million to a cohort of somewhere between 13 and 15 youth-led organizations, which is great. We applied. Please pray for me. But we need more of that. We need more of finance going to youth-led organizations and initiatives. So maybe that looks like having some sort of percentage from different organizations and companies and industries going back into the next generation.
Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to thank Dr. Beverly Wright, Mass Christensen, and Wawa Gathru. I think this has been a fabulous panel and given us a lot of inspiration. Please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause.
Please welcome the moderator for our next panel, Helen Clarkson, OBE, CEO of Climate Group.
Good afternoon, everyone. As we confront the climate crisis, we're going to need to adopt an approach of restless innovation, embracing progress, and taking risks. This has been the hallmark of the digital revolution we've experienced together over the last 25 years. And if we can take these principles when addressing climate change, we can drive lasting, scalable action. So to join me to explore the technologies shaping our future, the challenges ahead, and the change we hope to inspire is a fantastic panel of experts. First, I'm honoured to introduce the CEO of the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator, Raquel Moses. Then representing the cutting edge of sustainable mobility, Frederica Claren from Polestar. And finally, we're honoured to be joined by Lars Aagaard, Denmark's Minister for Climate, Energy and Utilities. So please welcome them to the stage. So Frederica, I'm going to come straight to you. Technology-driven innovation is central to Polestar's mission. Drawing from lessons learned over the last decade of rapid technological development, what strategies are you applying to accelerate climate action in the automotive industry? And how do you ensure that the innovation is balanced with that human-centered approach and meaningful policy engagement?
Well, I mean, we are so committed at Polestar to being the climate solution that the world needs now, right? We have an amazing climate solution in the car industry that we all need to rally behind to show up in time for the climate crisis. And we are really proving that we can scale this technology. We've been around for 8 years, Polestar, and in the last 5 years that I've been at Polestar, we've been able to deliver 5 amazing, what I think, electric cars. Not only through really leveraging existing infrastructures that we can tap into within the group that we work within, but also in really tapping into how we can speed up, for example, the production processes, the product development process. So I think we're showing that this technology really is here to stay and that we can implement it in an amazing way to have climate action today.
That's great. And are there barriers that are preventing you from going even faster on that?
I mean, what we're seeing now, of course, is a challenging geopolitical situation. I mean, we all know this. But where we're leaning in to the strength that we have in terms of the consumers wanting to change. We know that there's, the big silent majority, the 8-9% of people who wants to really have solutions to take climate action in their everyday life. And we can leverage that if we can only really show them that this technology will be something for you, something that will improve your life, help you have the freedom that you want from owning and driving a car, or sharing a car if that's something that you would want to do. And I think that what we're doing is really tapping into, the 3 core strengths that we want to stand for as a brand: design, performance, sustainability. We want to make beautiful, safe products, but where our customers also feel that, they help them live a more sustainable lifestyle.
Yeah, great.
And it seems to work. I mean,
and they are beautiful cars. You were kind enough to, not you, but your team drove me around one in London. It didn't get above 5 miles per hour.
Oh, that was
not your fault, but it was London traffic. So if the next one could fly, then that would be
You want to hit the pedal in a...
But it was a lovely experience as we drove through traffic. Polestar speaks a lot about transparency as a core element of your approach. What's the value there? Why talk about transparency and how do you go about that?
I mean, as a young company still. When we set out to build, our business strategy and our brand, we knew that we wanted to leave behind the old days of the industry, where, for the industry for a long time had put up smokes and mirrors and work in very traditional conservative ways, not sharing data or information. And we knew that if we want to accelerate the transition, we need to really make the customer trust us.
Yeah.
So we are embracing radical transparency. I mean, it's not easy, but it's something that we work with every day. For example, if you're interested in a Polestar, you can go into our website and see the full life cycle assessment of all of our models and variants, and really learn about the carbon depth that they come from. So we really want to talk about the fact that it is a climate solution, but it's not clean or sustainable today.
Yeah.
And that really strikes a chord with our customers and owners. It engages them in a very profound way, just this simple measure as putting out the life cycle assessment that probably no one reads from page 1 to the last one.
But it's there.
But it's there.
Yeah.
It's there, and that's the important thing.
Someone in a session I was in this morning talked about progress versus perfection, and we need to go for that progress. I thought it's quite interesting in that transparency approach.
Absolutely, and what we can also show them is the progress that we're making on our journey to decarbonize also our value chain.
Yeah.
Just because we're a climate solution doesn't mean that we don't have to decarbonize.
Yeah.
We have to do that radically, and our big challenge is, of course, growing. Producing more electric cars to be able to replace fossil fuel cars is so important. But we are hell-bent on really decoupling, the growth from environmental impact. And I'm very proud to say that in 4 years, we've reduced the relative emissions with 25%.
That's great.
By really focusing on the production-related emissions of our cars.
Great. Raquel, let's turn to you. You've led digital transformation across global tech firms and now drive climate innovation across the Caribbean by building a model for regional collaboration with the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. What's that process been like? What are the challenges of driving innovation across the different policy and community landscapes? And what can other regions learn from how you build this meaningful action?
Sure, and thank you so much for the question. I mean, the process has been both encouraging and discouraging at the same time. We see so many incredible concepts and ideas coming out of the Caribbean. As an example, we have a company called Rum and Sargassum out of Barbados. They're taking sargassum seaweed waste with rum distillery waste and making a biofuel. They're also creating conversion kits for cars, and it's a part of the decarbonization plan for Barbados. There's a company out of Jamaica called Carbon Attack Filter. They are creating kits that you can use to decarbonize internal combustion engine cars, because even, we still have sort of an attrition rate to work with. So if we can capture the carbon from traditional cars while we also convert to electric cars, that's brilliant. Out of Trinidad, we have entrepreneurs creating microbes that can eat oil and gas waste, and they're in prototyping of that right now. We also have in Guadeloupe an amazing solution that is using a GIS-based app to map the growth cycle of different plants so that people can join a cooperative. So if you have a mango tree that is, the mangoes are just falling and going to rot, they can come and collect and flash freeze for export these fruits. So we have all of these magnificent developments and technological innovations, but we don't get the necessary attention that we deserve for all of the innovations that are taking place. And there are so many more. However, we don't have a robust venture capital or startup capital ecosystem. So the gap that we have and the challenge that we face is that we don't have enough philanthropy. And we talk a lot about, well, there's not enough climate finance. And without wanting to be provocative, I have more climate investment available than I have projects able to take that up. What I don't have enough of is climate philanthropy. So that is grant money versus investment money, because the projects are not quite in that life cycle yet, or aren't large enough yet to be able to absorb commercial capital. We have tons of loan money available and less, but still equity available. So there's a lot that is available to us, but there is so much more that we need to do. We've created a climate smart map that you can find at map.caribbeanaccelerator.org. And that's a platform that you can use, also technology, to match projects with sources of funding, philanthropy, investment, so that again, we can close that gap between where the projects are and what is available to us, so that we can then just get that momentum going in the right direction.
So when you say lack of attention, is it the philanthropists, but how about policymakers, or what are the other sectors where you're sort of seeking that attention?
Certainly, I think so I was in a session this morning where, a lot of climate tech producers were talking about, oh, we're producing this and we're producing that, and we want access to your market. If we are going to change the landscape of what has happened with industrialization, we're going to have to acknowledge that, yes, we can be buyers, but the markets where the carbon is produced also have to open and be willing to be buyers as well, if we're going to sort of change the landscape of where we're coming from to the brighter, more equitable future that we'd like to get to. It's great, we can buy things, but we also need to have the ability to build our economies and sell things and sell solutions. And so that's I worry less about the policy. I think the policymakers, we are so close to the problem. While the policies aren't where they need to be, the issue is rarely, is there a willingness to create the policy? It is more, are there markets available for the solutions that we're developing? Does it make economic sense? Can it be prioritized based on the other challenges that we face?
And you mentioned equity there. Can we talk a bit about communities? And is there a risk of tech-driven climate solutions leaving communities behind? And how are you looking at that issue?
So, the hard part about that question is that my role before this was I was head of Microsoft for Trinidad and Tobago. So when you ask a technologist about what's the solution, they're going to tell you it's technology, right? So the communities is going to be fine. But not true. But I do think that there are so many opportunities for technology to solve the problems. I do think that the communities need to lead on what are the solutions that they require, and they also need to have an opportunity to participate. One of the great opportunities in our region is that we have the ability to collaborate on energy independence because we have so much geothermal across the region. And so one of the things that people worry a lot about right now is where's the power for AI? Well, we have the ability, we have so much excess green energy from this geothermal that we can't explore because we can't afford to. If we can start attracting some data centers that AI can be built on, that would be a huge opportunity for the communities as well as for the globe to decarbonize an industry that is absolutely growing so rapidly.
Yeah. Great. Minister, let's turn to you and get a national perspective on this. Denmark has set ambitious climate targets. You've committed to 70% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030. And technology is often seen as the engine of ambitious progress like that. So how is the Danish government leveraging digital transformation and climate tech to meet those goals? And what lessons can we learn globally from Denmark's transition?
First, I truly acknowledge that it's difficult copying what is done in one country to another. So when I speak about my own country, I hope you can get some inspiration for it, but you have to find your own way forward because we differ due to where we are economically, natural resources and so on. Having said that, a very good friend of mine in Denmark, he's the chairman of the Metal Workers Union. He has a very good saying, and that it goes as the following. He's only afraid of one thing: old technologies, which is a pretty bold statement from a union president for metal workers. So the starting point for us is we believe that humans has not invented the last genius thing, so new technologies will come, and we must embrace that. Secondly, we can only win the climate battle if we are able to produce a positive narrative for our citizens, and that goes for the Danes as it goes for everybody around the world. That means that we must convince them that going green, we go into a better future with better product, better services, better living condition compared to if we do nothing. And then you need to, of course, as someone working with politics, being willing to use the toolbox you have in front of you. So in Denmark, we set a 70% reduction target towards 90. When it was done, people said it could not be met. This year, our independent climate councils acknowledged that we are on track. And why is that? That is due to another thing, and that is partnership. Because we approached this with our private sector. We divided them into 10 separate sectors, so energy-intensive industries, small and medium-sized firms, the financial sector, the digital sector, and so on. And we invited them in and asked them, okay, we are going to meet the target. How do you think we should do it? And this partnership with the private sector and the ideas that they come up with has been a very good inspiration, but also a way of sharing the responsibilities broadly among us. So we are on track, and that is due to, of course, the innovation, the willingness to invest by the private sector, but also due to a willingness to use the toolbox we have as a politician. So we have introduced a carbon tax on our industry. We are the first country in the world that has decided to put a carbon tax on the agricultural sector, the non-energy related emissions in the agriculture sector. That means an emission of part of what is coming out of a cow. And we have done it together with the agricultural sector. And why have we succeeded in that? Well, it's because that we also are willing to invest some public money before the tax is introduced, so they help them to transform their companies. And there is nothing like a tax that can spur innovation. I mean, who are paying their taxes with great pressure, with a lot of satisfaction? Few people do. Yeah. So therefore, what we see is now a tremendous innovation in different kind of technologies that can help the private sector getting out of the tax, of course. The other thing we are doing is we are investing a lot of public money into R&D and also to some part subsidize the private sector going from old to new technologies. Because remember, we have spent like 150 years in building a very efficient economy based on fossil fuels. And now we have like 20 years to turn it into another economy purely run on green technologies, even though I heard somebody say today that green technologies doesn't work. I'm still a little bit puzzled about that. But for a huge part of the world, green technologies and green energy is actually working. And then, of course, Denmark is a very small country, so we are not a car-producing country, for example. But we have made the framework so that last year, 80% of new sold passenger cars in our country were electric. 80%. And the number are even higher for this year. That can only be done. Of course, you can create your taxation of cars and how you use the car, that can help. But it also due to the fact that we have been able to make sure that somebody was willing to invest in the needed charging infrastructure, because then you have a better car. And if you can get it charged, then you have, as a customer, a better service compared to what you have before. So this willingness to use the political toolbox and then respect when you're working with the private sector, because this is a capital-intensive transformation that we are into. You must set your targets. You must stay with your target. You must build trust on the policies you're making, because it allows the private sector to do what it does best: innovate and invest. And then we have a few technologies where we are more than average willing to invest, and that is CCS. So we will be one of the first countries where large-scale CCS will be installed in our cement factory with the large heat and power producers. So if you are visiting Denmark 5 years from now and you're driving by a big, I think it's called a chimney, right? There will probably be a carbon capture facility linked to that. We will develop onshore storage facility for that CO2. We will invest in hydrogen infrastructure going from Denmark to Germany, because German industry needs green hydrogen. We have the potential to produce the wind needed for that. And we will take renewable energy as part of our energy mix to the extreme, which I think will develop also room for technology development, because then we need somebody to balance the intermittency. That means a lot of batteries, it means intelligent charging of electric vehicles and so on. So I truly believe that by being in the front, we can sort of also help companies that want to test and develop their technologies to be part of that journey, and by that being in the front of what will be needed for the future.
And could you just ask how is it, so Denmark is somewhere around 50% of energy coming from wind and solar. How's that gone down with people, and how has that commitment gone down with the Danish people?
But as in all countries, we have everybody is struggling with the NIMBY problem. So everybody is in favor of green transition, just not in my backyard. And I mean, there are few people that really think that high voltage lines are beautiful. And of course, if you are just the next neighbor to a large solar or wind facility or any other large facility, you meet opposition. So of course, we have incentives to engage with the local communities and make sure that some of the benefits of the local production are also a benefit for the local community. That is one part of the question. And the other part is that the need for green energy is so big that we have a willingness to support offshore wind, not only because it can help us produce enormous amount of green energy, but also because that it is a bit easier to get public acceptance of something that is beyond your sight.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ingredients, but first and foremost, you need to engage with the local community, you need to create incentive, and you need also to be sensitive, because if green transition is something that is put down from the top on the head of people, there is a risk that they resist.
Yeah.
So again, it comes down to the green transition must give opportunities, it must give hope. We have to be technology open and believe in new technologies and help innovation. And some of the toolbox you have as a politician is, I would say, the carrots, but you should also be willing to use this.
A bit of both. Raquel, we talked a bit about this before we came onto this, but let's talk about that kind of access point and how we get that balance, with innovation, but also keeping people at the heart of climate action. And where should we be careful not to let tech overshadow that sort of human piece?
Sure. I think the important thing is to sort of keep top of mind where we're seeing progress, right? So a lot of times people don't think of the Caribbean as a technological hub, but we have a lot of progress that we are making against all odds without the requisite, financial economy. We have Suriname, for example, one of the only countries to overshoot their nationally determined contributions.
Right.
And so, a beautiful thing. Costa Rica, one of a handful of countries globally that can operate almost exclusively on renewable energy. And we need to tap into those kinds of things so that we build our confidence. But we also, and I had a conversation with a friend of mine a few days ago, and I was saying, we really need to build this tech pipeline of projects, because we have more investors than we have projects that are ready. And she said, rather than going out to the market and looking for these entrepreneurs, why don't you go to the private sector, see what are the climate solutions they require, and have the entrepreneurs create solutions for them. It was a revelation, and I was like, why didn't I think of that before? And so now, that happened 5 days ago, and we've already started the conversations with the private sector to say, what are some of the things that you need that we can have either the communities or the entrepreneurs to solve for you, and always in consultation with the people on the front lines and giving them the opportunities rather than coming to them and saying, I believe this is what you need.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're sort of going to try more matchmaking, those sorts of
More, well, we've always been matchmakers.
Yeah, but the other way around.
But the other way around, exactly.
Yeah. That's great. Frederica, for clean technology to drive change, it's got to be effective and accessible.
Yes.
But Polestar recently broke the Guinness World Record for the longest journey by an electric SUV on a single charge. How far was it?
23 hours straight they drove. It was
Wow.
581 miles.
Okay, that's impressive.
Quite the feat.
As it becomes more feasible for people? What do you think needs to happen across industry, infrastructure, to get that into more people's hands, and so that we're not reacting like that? Well, of course it went 23 hours, you know.
Yeah.
What are those steps that needs to go through?
I mean, we have to take accountability in the industry for sending a clearer signal to consumers. We often, I mean, when I sit in different industry, panel debates and so on, it's always a lot of finger pointing at policymakers right now. But it really starts with us. Both consumers and policymakers, they listen to the industry. And we are currently very vague on how quickly the transition will go. Everyone's talking about the electrification, that is the future, but I mean, we all know that we're on the clock. It's not when we get there, it's how quickly we get there, right? So I would really love to see the automotive industry really stepping up and taking accountability for sending a clear signal to consumers and policymakers. We also need to secure that policymakers, of course, hold the line and stick to the commitments that they have set. For example, the EU ICE ban in 2035 really needs to hold, because as an industry, we have betted on this commitment from the EU, so important. And beyond that, I mean, I want to see them leverage electric mobility in their NDCs now, like Denmark is doing. It's such an impactful solution. It's kind of a silver bullet. So put it in your NDCs, and it will have an amazing impact, I think.
Yeah, I think people don't understand the silver bullet, but we did a report last year in partnership, or Exeter University did, and we launched it. And it talked about electric vehicles as this super tipping point because of what it does to actually the fossil fuel chains and markets. And I think it can get stuck in people's head as a sort of, lovely fancy car thing, as opposed to such a critical shift that will actually change the dynamics of fossil fuels.
Yeah, exactly. 15% of global greenhouse gases comes from road transport. I mean, such a great chunk of fossil fuel transported around the world is just there to really underpin this industry. So it really will have an amazing impact if we can remove those.
And the other bit of that 2035 target in our work we've seen is about actually sending a signal that will drive the second-hand market, because a lot of us buy a car second-hand, and then in order for those vehicles to have a good value, you need that clear signal. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm watching the EU from the UK, which is no longer part. Minister, Denmark's long championed wind energy, heavily invested in it both domestically and globally. Energy security keeps coming up the agenda, and nations around the world talking about it. How can Denmark talk about, show that it's not just about embracing renewables from an environmental imperative, but there's an energy security imperative too?
Well, right now Denmark has the presidency of the European Union, so I think I will start there.
So we're pitching our ICE to you.
The US President today gave a speech at the UN General Assembly, and I'm glad that there was one thing in the speech that I agree with him on, and that is that it is absurd that the EU are still buying fossil fuels from Russia. That, of course, has to come to an end. EU are in a good position now to do that. There is a legal proposal on the table that can be approved by a qualified majority, which means that the few countries that does not have the same view as the Danish government, that we should stop importing fossil fuels from Russia rather today than tomorrow, there is a good chance we can have that adopted under our presidency. That does not mean that EU then are on the safe side, because EU is a net importer of fossil fuels. And regardless of you're buying that from a friend or somebody who used to be your friend, or not so much a friend used to be, and so on, you should not be too dependent on importing anything from one supplier. It's not good in business. It's also not good if you are trying to run sustainable, responsible policies framework around your economy. So we then need in EU an approach to get out of using fossil fuels, oil and natural gas. And the answer to any economy cannot be not giving access to energy. So of course that implies that then that we need to go for something that is carbon neutral and is grown in EU. And that basically means solar, wind, and nuclear, and then it means electricity. So therefore, electrification of transportation sector, heating, cooling, in industries, a shift there to electrification is core of the strategy. And that shift is, of course, tremendously capital intensive, so therefore long-term framework is needed. With the current market situation, it also takes a willingness from government to go in and help the private sector manage some of the risk. So therefore, it's not because I like it, because I would prefer that we could build offshore wind without any subsidies. We tested the market. It proved that it cannot do it under the current circumstances. We have had tenders where the private sector were willing to pay us to get access to build offshore wind. But with the current market situation, it's not possible for the private sector. And what we then can do is to introduce a support scheme called the CFD, Contract for Difference, that is taking some of the risks out of the future electricity price from the private sector. It means that the cost of capital can go down, means that the whole investment environment around offshore wind can then again be up and running. So government needs to be willing to engage with the private sector, and we need to be agile, because I think some of the challenges that are facing us now is that we sort of have a clear vision and direction for where we will go, but the environment are so dynamic that policies also needs to change. Right. So I think this is sort of the ingredients we're working on, and
good.
We need to strive to get rid of use of fossil fuels for climate, but also for security reasons.
Excellent, thank you. Well, the panel was called The Challenge, the Tech and the Change. I think we've covered all of those. So please join me in thanking our panelists. And now to moderate the final panel of the Flagship, please welcome your host, Maeve, back to the stage.
Thank you, Helen. So 2 really fascinating and very different conversations we just heard there. Now it's time for the last one, which is called Going Beyond the Echo Chamber. In a world of information overload and rising polarization, how we talk about climate change is now arguably as crucial as the action itself. The right messages can turn skepticism into solutions. But how do we reach people? First, today, we welcome Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, Chief Scientist at the Nature Conservancy. Next, I'm going to be joined by Malaika Vaz, who's co-founder and CEO of the production company Untamed Planet. And finally, please welcome Benjamin Bakker, founder and CEO of Nature is Nonpartisan. Thank you so much, guys. So we're going to do this a bit differently to maybe some of the other panels that you've seen, in the sense that we're going to go back and forth. I want to tell all of you now, feel free to interrupt each other. Feel free to come in. You don't have to necessarily wait for me to ask you a question. So just getting that straight. So Catherine, I'm going to start with you. You're a bit of a legend, certainly to me. I just want you to tell us a bit about the work you do, because your focus is on accessible arguments for climate action, which don't dilute the urgency of the message. That's quite a hard balance to strike. So what does that look like to you?
It's very hard, because as a scientist, we know that the situation is getting more urgent and more dire every year. And so our instinct, all of our collective instincts, when we see a disaster, is to yell fire. But if people don't know what to do, they won't do anything. In fact, I was just at the farmer's market last Saturday, and a siren went off, and I was speaking to the woman at the booth where I was buying my honey, and she said, I don't even know what the siren's for, so I don't know what to do. And I thought that's the perfect metaphor for climate change. So the science is clear that it's real, it's us, it's bad, and scientists agree, but there's 2 more key truths we need to know to activate change. And those two key truths are others care and there is hope. There's something we can do to make a difference. So with the urgency, I think of it as two sides of the coin. We have to share the urgency, but at the same time, in the same breath, if possible, and if not the next breath, we have to tell people what we can do about it to make a difference. Because otherwise the whole world would be worried, but if we don't know what to do, we'll do nothing. So urgency with hope is the magic formula for action.
And what kind of words are we talking about here? Because I know that you actually spend a lot of your time communicating to sometimes skeptical audiences. Is that right? Could you tell us about maybe a time when you've been stood in front of an audience who are somewhat skeptical of whether climate change exists, whether it's human-induced, what you said to them and how it cut through?
I absolutely could. I live in Texas, and for many years I lived in the second most conservative city in the US, where when there's an election, there's a Republican candidate, and then there's a conservative Republican candidate, telling us how liberal the Republican candidate is. I have also spoken in the most conservative city, which is Provo, Utah, as well as Lubbock, Texas. And I've lived there for many years, and so I know that people don't really doubt the science because everybody uses airplanes and stoves and fridges, and that's the same science explains how they work as explains how climate is changing. But they've been told that it isn't real by people who don't want to fix it. And that's why it's so great that we're having this panel to talk about that. And so by sharing solutions that work for people, we can get them on board. So a number of years ago, I was speaking at the Texas Water Managers Association. And water is actually more important than oil in Texas. Water is where it's at. And I was up after a state senator and a state representative, both of whom are well known for saying climate isn't changing and humans aren't responsible. So I thought to myself, what am I going to do? And I decided to try an experiment. I decided to talk all about how long-term trends are increasing our drought risk. That's why this matters, the heart. And talk all about the hands, what we can do to prepare for and mitigate this incredible drought risk that's getting worse year after year, without ever mentioning the words climate and change in sequence. I talked about climate variability, I talked about long-term trends, and I gave all the other data and arguments that I normally would. I just never said climate change. So afterwards, well, first of all, nobody booed, which was a good thing. And then afterwards, a woman came running up to me. And I will never forget, she was wearing a tweed suit, and she came running up to me, and she grabbed my hand, and she shook it up and down like this. And she said, "That was phenomenal. I agree with everything you said." And then she said, "Those people who talk about global warming, I don't agree with them at all. But this makes sense." And so that taught me that we can talk about this issue if we start with the heart, why it matters to both of us as parents, as citizens of that location, as people who do the same thing or care about the same thing. And then we bring in the hands, something practical we can do together to help fix it. And often when we have those conversations and bring people along, once they see themselves in the solutions, their objections to the science evaporate.
Very interesting, especially the idea of not using the word at all. Benji, I have to bring you in here.
Yes.
Because you describe yourself as a lover of the outdoors, a proud American. You've written a book called The Conservative Environmentalist, Common Sense Solutions for a Sustainable Future. What is a conservative environmentalist, and how do you relate to what Catherine was just saying?
Well, first of all, good afternoon. Catherine, your comments are spot on. The quickest way to not sell a book is to call it conservative environmentalist. So conservatives hate it because it has the word environmentalist in it, and liberals hate it because it has the word conservative in it. So I highly suggest that if you're looking to flop. No, in all seriousness, we've gotten caught up in this word vomit where every single word is polarizing in this country. And climate change has become part of the culture wars, even though it affects us all equally regardless of our political identity. And I consider myself a conservative climate activist. I just consider myself a lover of the outdoors. I don't really care what the title is. We all across the spectrum need to work together to solve climate change. And if we write off half the country, if we don't include half the country in the dialogue, there is no way that we will ever solve climate change. And it's not just a Trump problem. It's a 2030s, 2040s, 2050s. We need to get the communities that Catherine and I talked to the table if we're going to solve this challenge. I grew up in Appleton, Wisconsin, with a family, also a very conservative place, with a family of conservative vegans in Wisconsin, okay? I wore cheese heads going to football games, but my parents didn't even eat cheese. So I grew up in a place and in a family where we were not really fitting the mold of the political boxes that we put ourselves in this country. And conservatives and liberals, they share a lot of the same values, and they don't share some of the same values, but they all want a healthier planet for the next generation. And we have not tapped into that for decades. It's a remarkable statistic. In 1990, 82% of Americans self-identified as environmentalists. 82%. Today, the number is less than 40%. And it's because this issue has been caught up in a culture war, and we have to get it out of it. And so as a conservative who ends up actually voting both ways, I don't really care about the politics, I just care about the outcome. And I don't care who wins the election. I'm gonna try to make as much progress regardless of who wins, regardless of what day it is, regardless of how bad the last 6 months have been, or regardless of how challenging the next 3.5 years are. Because we cannot wait until the situation is perfect to solve this challenge. And if we don't work across party lines, we'll never get there. And that's why conservative environmentalism is so important to me, because it's not about conservative versus liberal, it's about all of us working together to solve this challenge. And there's a way to do it, communicate in ways that people care about. Farmers in the Midwest care about farming. You know, people in Arizona, where I live now, care a lot about the water quality and the lack of water access and air quality. We have to tap into people's communities and the things that they care about. And if you do that, you can get pretty much everyone to the table.
Thank you. And I'll come back to that because I've got lots to say on that, Benji. So, Malaika, I think what I'm going to bring, the way I'm going to start this is bringing you all in on this kind of hyper-local element, because I think it's something that you all have in common. So I know that you focus mainly on visual storytelling as your medium. How do you focus on the hyper-local? And you know, is that a powerful tool for storytelling for you?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I completely agree with everything both of you have said. I think right now we're experiencing simultaneously compassion fatigue and this epidemic of inertia. And I think the way that visual storytelling, for me in my production company, film, really cuts through that is by shattering those silos and making people sit up and pay attention. I think we're all experiencing very, very difficult times when it comes to our climate, and we're seeing the statistics out there. But how do we actually humanize that data? If I tell you XX million people are dying because of air pollution, that feels like a reality that is far away from us. But if I tell you about the story of my friend Robert Taylor in Louisiana, who spent 40 years saving up for his wonderful house and then had his entire family be exposed to toxic pollutants because of the extractive industry in his backyard, that's when it hits home. That's when that story becomes real. And I think that filmmaking and any kind of visual medium is a really powerful way to get through to people. I also think that, you know, to the point that both of you were making, it is incredibly important to make sure that we tell people that not only is nature nonpartisan and do we need bipartisan support for nature conservation, but equally that this is not a sacrifice. For the longest time, we have branded nature conservation and climate change mitigation as a sacrifice, as something that gives us less progress, less growth, and less civilizational success. And I think for the first time in history, we're talking about abundance. What does it mean to have this abundance theory when it comes to conservation? I think it is about really ensuring that we're helping people to understand that when we protect nature, we have more resilient businesses. We have better public health systems. We have beautiful natural spaces that still have beautiful predators like tigers roaming. We have all of those things. So this isn't about sacrifice. This is about creating a world where we can truly have abundance.
And abundance is a great word there, because I wonder, and all of you can come in on this maybe, what you think of the word hope nowadays and optimism. Because I find, I've been to a lot of these conferences, and the last question on the panel is always, and what gives you hope? And I sometimes find myself saying, God, I've heard the same question at every panel, every conference for 3 years in a row. And I worry as a storyteller and a journalist myself that the word hope is being diluted and losing its power. You know, what do we do about that?
I think about that a lot. So when I give presentations, and for the last 5 or 10 years, I've given almost 100 a year, most of them virtually, I use interactive software so that people can ask me whatever question they want. And even better, they can upvote the questions they most want. And so about 6 or 7 years ago, I started to realize that the question that was rising to the top, no matter whether I was speaking to high school students, climate scientists, botanical artists, the Garden Club of America, or Catholic nuns, any of those, the same question was rising to the top. And this was, again, 6 or 7 years ago: what gives you hope? Or the flip side, are we screwed? Depends how honest people were being that day. And so, as a scientist, I thought, I have to research this. I don't know the answer to this question. What does give us hope? And what fascinated me, and what I actually ended up putting in my book called Saving Us, because it's not about saving the planet. The planet will be orbiting the sun long after we're gone. It's about saving all of us living things together, because our life depends on nature, like you said. Even if we disappeared, nature would be fine. But if it disappeared, we would not. So being conservative is actually, by definition, caring for nature. So if you're conservative, I think you actually should be a better carer for nature. Anyways, so what I realized is that psychology, neuroscience, even theology, all gives us the same answer of what hope is. Hope is the ability to act and to make a difference. So hope is not an emotion that you feel. Hope is not just ignoring reality. Hope is recognizing it's bad, because if you don't realize how bad it is, you don't need hope. So hope begins with that overwhelming sense of anxiety or even despair that we have. That's where hope begins. And then the next step is recognizing a better future is possible and starting to articulate what that future looks like with the clean air, the nature in our cities, the bountiful life full of the things that really matter that you can't put dollar signs on. And then the next step of hope is, how do we get there, and how can I be part of that? So I don't feel hope, I practice it. I practice it relentlessly every day, as if there's a Hope Olympics and I want to compete. And then I share it with people. I have a newsletter every week where I share good news about climate solutions and what people can do to make a difference, called Talking Climate. And I do that as my personal practice, because if we don't practice hope, we're not going to get there. As Christiana Figueres says, we're only as doomed as we believe ourselves to be. So we have to practice hope. It's not what gives it to me, it's how do you practice it. In fact, I would like to see people ask that question at the end of panels.
How do we practice hope?
Yes.
Okay, I'm taking note. And everyone else should too. Ben, did you want to come in now?
Yeah, well, I think I agree with everything you just said as well. And I think every day when I wake up, I look at the news and I think, wow, this is really shitty. And every day I wake up and I think, how can I go 1-0 today? How can I make the most progress possible today in my life with what I can control, instead of thinking about everything else that's going on in the world? Because I can't solve everything. None of us can solve everything. And if you want to have hope, you have to believe that the problem's as bad as it is, but that you can actually go out there and solve it. Trying to create the future of the environmental movement is what I'm trying to do by creating a nonpartisan movement, so that we can actually have durable policy regardless of who wins an election. Maybe not now, but in the future. If the news was better than it was today, I'd probably feel less motivated to do what I'm doing right now, right? Like every day I wake up and I see what's happening and I think to myself, oh my gosh, this is needed more than ever. So our activism and our hope and our optimism is needed more than ever to be practiced in a time when it is really hard. And trying to launch a nonpartisan environmental movement in the year 2025 has not been easy. It's cost probably a lot of years off of my life in terms of lack of sleep. But it makes me want to do more and more every single day. And I will say, I don't win every day. I don't go 1-0 every day. And none of us do. But a couple months ago, we got a huge win when there was a Senate bill that was proposed to sell off 3 million acres of public lands in the American West. Some of you probably saw that. And I woke up and I thought, this sucks, right? What can I do about it? So I didn't realize that this was going to happen, but I tweeted out at the senator that proposed it, please do not sell off 3 million acres of our public lands. And I posted some pictures of me in those public lands, and it went viral. He shot back and said that I was lying. And so I fact-checked him, and it ended up going viral, and 5 million people ended up engaging in it. We had far-right militia leaders in Idaho who were saying to this senator, we will primary you, and if you come for our public lands, we will effing kill you. Okay, that's how crazy this was. And we had Patagonia saying the same thing, obviously in a nicer way. But we built this unlikely coalition of people over something that was really bad, right? 3 million acres of public lands are going to be sold off, but we stopped that because we had the opportunity to spread that hope. So I agree that when things are bad, that's the time to lean in. That's the time to build those unlikely coalitions. And I might not agree with the far-right militia leader on pretty much anything, but I did agree on do not sell our public lands. So why not team up and work together to solve this complex problem? That is what hope looks like. And we have lost the ability to do that as Americans and as a global population because we try to write people off if they're not in the right box, right? This person's liberal, therefore they're just a socialist communist that's trying to steal our lives away. Or that person's a conservative, they probably hate women and gay people. And so we can't work with people who don't think like us. But that is the quickest way to fail because that is not a winning coalition. And we need a winning coalition, and hope looks like a winning coalition, like the one that stopped the 3 million acre public land sell-off.
Yes. Benji, is it easier to make nature non-partisan than climate?
Yes.
Why?
Because there's a personal connection that everyone has to nature. And of course, climate change is impacting nature at a increasingly problematic scale. But I've spent the last 8 years traveling around the country. I've been to almost every state 5 times to try to understand what is going on the ground. People in Salt Lake, Utah, Provo, Utah, they care about the Salt Lake, and they care about the air quality and the water quality. They do not care about sea level rise at all. Yeah. Farmers in the Midwest do not care about sea level rise at all. They care about keeping the farms healthy for the next generation so that they can feed our families. People in Florida do not care about Salt Lake. They care about Florida. And that's okay. But if you connect it to nature, everyone has a tie to nature in their own communities that resonates with them, that they have a personal tie to. And that's why clean air, clean water, restoring forests, restoring habitats, these have 90+% pull numbers. So it's the entry point to build that winning coalition so that we can have the conversation about climate in the first place. It's not leaning away from climate. And oh, by the way, if you restore ecosystems and you protect nature and you restore forests, you also have the potential to reduce emissions by 50% if you do it correctly. So there is also a very positive climate benefit, even though we usually talk about EVs and clean energy, we don't talk enough about nature as a climate solution. But everyone's why, WHY, is going to be different based on where they live, what their background is, but nature is the one thing that connects us all. And so we are about to launch a bipartisan nature caucus in the Senate. We are having so much success in getting bipartisan nature policies across the finish line in a time when it's as polarizing as ever. And I believe that nature can be the bridge to all of us because every single person wants forests to be conserved for future generations. Everyone wants the national parks to be funded. Everyone wants clean water in their communities, including in Lubbock, Texas, or in Midland, Texas, the oil capital of the United States. And when you open up with that, you build the most unlikely alliances possible, and it's more likely to talk about climate change, or maybe you don't have to. Maybe you can get somebody to support restoring forests not because of climate change, but because they want to have a healthy forest in their backyard. And who cares, right? It's the same outcome. And I think that that's the bridge of how we create a nonpartisan environmental movement in this country, is trying to meet people where they're at instead of telling them what they should care about. Because when you talk about climate change, we're often telling them, you should care about sea level rise, you person in Nebraska, and they're like, I'm just trying to feed my family, okay? I'm trying to look at these corn stalks that are not growing as fast as I want them to. I don't care about sea level rise, right? So, but if you talk about water quality in Nebraska, you've got them on board from the get-go. So that's how we make climate progress, and that's how we build a nonpartisan environmental movement.
Mm-hmm. And Malika, I'm sure you relate to this in the sense that the stories that you tell and the people that you meet in the communities all over the world in your films, I'm sure they don't want to be preached at either. How do you make sure that you're centering their voices, and what do you find that comes out of it?
I think I always begin with a sense of empathy, and every single member of my team is similar. We all believe that we cannot be preaching to audiences. We do need to be meeting them where they're at. And as an example, I personally have the worst carbon footprint. I'm constantly flying across the world to film for documentaries and to speak at panels, and I eat seafood. I grew up on the coast in Goa in India, and I do go and buy fast fashion occasionally. So do I have the right to be calling myself an environmentalist? Some would say no. But I do think that we need to reframe our conversation around what that perfect environmentalist is. You don't have to be doing everything right to be an advocate for climate and for protecting nature today. So I think really getting people into the conversation by asking them, What is your sphere of influence? And how do you use that? I like to call it your impact orbit. How do you use that impact orbit in the most intelligent way possible? And for me, that is not about your consumer responsibility only. I think it is a huge disservice to nature today if we have people starting their day by using a bamboo toothbrush and then using a bamboo straw and then putting on their all-natural organic cotton clothes and then going into a board meeting and making decisions that harm nature. Our impact does not stop as consumers. We are actively influencing the world with every single action that we take every second of the day. And so when you think about your impact orbit, think about the people that you have access to, the capital you have access to, the networks you are connected to. How do you leverage those to protect nature? If you are a teacher, you have an amazing group of young people you can reach out to. If you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and I get to work with some incredible CEOs on corporate strategy, how do you then actually reach out to people and say, this is the responsibility of our business? And it's not an externality, but it's really who we are. So no matter what you do, I think we need to start thinking about it as integral to who we are. This is not about building out corporate social responsibility teams and having World Environment Day. It is about embedding nature conservation into every single day. And I think for us as a production company, my team at Untamed Planet is really focused on mainstreaming nature. And when we work with our partners and our friends at National Geographic and the BBC and Discovery and other networks, our focus is on ensuring that you wake up in the morning and you're listening to stories about nature. You could be talking about business, you could be talking about immigration, you could be talking about science. No matter what it is, nature is at the core of all of these stories, and we need to stop thinking about the environment as a reporting beat, but rather as this salient force that is connected to every story that we tell. And I think that getting this right is the biggest story of our time. Yeah. Because our life depends on nature. We can't live without it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that bamboo toothbrush analogy there. I think that's very relatable to a lot of us in the room in terms of the more kind of fluffy sides of sustainable living that we all try to do. But then if we're going into a boardroom and funding the destruction of nature, it's not exactly compatible. One thing I want to touch on with you, Catherine, before we finish is I'm interested by the fact, very interested by the fact that you're an evangelical Christian. I know you've said in the past that life as both a scientist and a Christian is like coming out of the closet. I'd love to know kind of what you mean by that and the link that you make between religion or faith and climate action.
Well, it shouldn't be, because if you as a Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, or someone of the Jewish tradition take the Bible seriously, then you believe that humans have a God-given responsibility to care for every living thing, including our sisters and our brothers on this planet. If you look at any other global religious tradition, nearly every single religious tradition has at its core ideas of being good stewards or caretakers and caring for those less fortunate than us. So caring for nature and caring for people. So with about 85% of people around the world affiliated with some type of religion, you would think that that would be one of the biggest motivations to care. And there are many religious leaders who do feel that responsibility. Pope Francis, of course, most famously. Pope Leo has taken that up. The current patriarch of the Orthodox Church is known as the Green Patriarch. Last year, I was not at Climate Week because I had the privilege to instead speak to a group of 10,000 global evangelical leaders from around the world. And those leaders were there recognizing already that their communities are suffering. So among people of faith worldwide, there is generally little to no disagreement that this is real, this is serious, and we have to do something about it because nature and the most vulnerable are suffering first and foremost, but after them, we're next. Yet, in the United States, somehow this confluence of ideology, politics, and religion has occurred over the last, it didn't start yesterday. It didn't even start 2 decades ago. It started back at the dawn of the American Revolution. It continued through the Scopes trial. It went through the adoption of abortion as a political issue in the 70s, and now climate change has gotten sucked into it, where people's statement of faith now is written first by their politics and their ideology, and only a second, if ever, by their theology. 40% of people in the US who call themselves evangelicals don't go to church. So where are they learning what they believe? They're learning it from the news they consume, not the text they profess to respect. So for me, I didn't grow up here. If you can't tell, I'm Canadian. And I actually became a climate scientist because I was a Christian. I was planning to become an astrophysicist. And that's actually what my first research is in, galaxies and black holes. And when I found out that climate change disproportionately affects the most vulnerable people on the planet who already don't have enough to eat, don't have a safe place to live, don't have clean water to drink, don't have access to basic health care, basic education that we take for granted, and that we are the ones making those decisions, the ones of us who live in high-income countries, that's not fair. And I felt like I had to do something about it. Not because I was a scientist, but because I was a person of faith. And because I'm a scientist, those are the skills I use. And each of us has an important skill. Telling stories is so important. Bringing people together, even more important. In a way, I feel like the science is the last thing we need now. We need all those other skills to catalyze action. And so for me, I truly feel that, and I know many people share my feeling. In fact, I just talked to someone today who said this exact same thing to me. If we take our faith seriously, whatever faith that is, we would be at the front of the line demanding climate action because we've made that head-to-heart connection. We've realized that who we are is the perfect person to care, and together we can figure out what we need to do to fix it.
So we have a lot to learn from the storytelling and faith traditions, and the fact that I think 87% of the globe will belong to a faith by 2050, so it really is kind of the untapped silent majority. So interesting. We have to finish, which is so sad because this is such an interesting conversation. I'm sure you'll all agree. So I'm just going to give one last question and you can all go around and answer. Benji, I'll start with you. It's the same question for everyone, which is just around, you know, in this storytelling crisis that we're facing, that we're talking about now, how can we reframe climate into an opportunity rather than a burden?
I think it's the right validators. We need people who speak to the audiences correctly. We need, you know, the hunting and fishing community to speak to the hunting and fishing community. We need the farmers to speak to the farmers. We need the climate scientists to speak to the climate scientists, right? We need people to speak to each other peer to peer. And the moment that my grandma decided that climate change was real was when her grandson was fighting for it. That's the future of how we create climate action.
I love that. I would say that we need to find ways to balance people, planet, and profit, and really think about that abundance theory more. In a time where not just this country, but the rest of the world feels more divided in every sense of that word, I think nature can be what brings us together. I recently met with this incredible snow leopard conservationist who's using snow leopard conservation to bring people together from countries like India and Pakistan and China. That's just one example of people using nature to unite people. Nature is the one global common we share. There is no such thing as an externality. We need to watch our language. Air, water, and land are not externalities. They are as much human in many ways as we are. They are integral to how we think about our being and our sense of place on this planet. And so what I would say is we need to start thinking about nature as part of who we are and us as part of nature, and really find ways to think about abundance today.
Thank you.
That's so true. So often we act as if we live on a flat, infinite planet, as if there's always somewhere to go to get more, and there's always somewhere to put our waste where it won't bother us. So in that sense, our entire economy is a flat Earth economy. We need to understand that we live on a round planet. And we share this round planet with 8 billion other people. And to care about the future of life on our planet, you don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be a filmmaker. You don't have to be somebody who's really interested in bringing political actors together. You don't have to be an environmentalist even. You literally have to be one thing, and that one thing is a human being living on this planet. As far as I know, we all are. So that means that whoever you are, you're already the perfect person to care. And if we're gonna have a conversation with someone, help them figure out why they're the perfect person to care. Like imagine if you care because you're a birder, and birds are very impacted by climate change. But imagine if I thought I had to make everyone in the world into a birder
before they could care about climate change. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's often what we do, isn't it, right? Like, we expect people have to care because what we do. Instead, let's have a conversation with them. Is it because of where their home is that they saved up for 40 years, and that's why they care because it's put their family at risk? Is it because they can't afford their insurance bill anymore because it's skyrocketed due to extreme events? Is it because they're a farmer and they're worried about the long-term sustainability of their land? Our job, your job, is to have a conversation and help people figure out why they already care. And it could be completely different than why you care, and that's totally fine. And then help them figure out what they can do to make a difference that helps them be an even more genuine version of who they already are. An even better parent, an even more sincere person of faith, an even more shrewd business person, a better human.
Thank you so much. Please give my panel a huge round of applause. To Climate NYC sponsors and partners, especially Train Technologies, our headline partner, the Estee Lauder company, and our Hub Live partner. Without their support, the events that we're hosting wouldn't be able to happen. So please do join us this afternoon for another lineup of sessions, which will be running across the 5 breakout rooms here. I hope you're leaving more inspired today than when you entered. Thank you.